You are listening to the Kiosk Marketplace podcast.
Welcome to Achieving Connectivity Integrity, a podcast brought to you by Kiosk Marketplace. I'm Elliot Maris, the editor of Kiosk Marketplace, and we're here today to talk about cellular connectivity to the network, a very important topic to our readers. I'm here today with Jason Dorough, the Vice President of Enterprise Sales at Digi International. Digi International is a global provider of mission-critical and business-critical machine-to-machine and Internet of Things connectivity products and services. Today, we're going to explore what companies and organizations need to consider when embarking on an interactive digital journey. Certainly, reliability is of critical concern for an online entity, as a business cannot continue to function with unreliable connectivity. Security is of equal concern given the increase in hacking incidents and the growing sophistication of hackers. Jason, thank you for being with us today. Welcome to Achieving Connectivity Integrity. This is Elliot Maris, the editor of Kiosk Marketplace. We're here today to talk about a very important topic, and that is achieving connectivity integrity. We're going to be speaking with Jason Dorough, the Vice President of Enterprise Sales at Digi International, a global provider of mission-critical and business-critical machine-to-machine and Internet of Things connectivity products and services. Today we're going to explore what companies and organizations need to consider when embarking on interactive digital technology. Interactive technology is growing at a very rapid pace across many industries today. Reliability of connectivity is of critical concern, as a business cannot continue to function with unreliable connectivity. Security is of equal concern given the increase we're hearing about in hacking incidents and the growing sophistication of hackers. Well, we'll just start right in with some questions for Jason. Jason, why does a business even need to get digital signage connected?
Well, first, I'd like to thank you, Elliot, for the time today. And obviously, this topic is pretty near and dear to our hearts. We, as providers of mainly connectivity and IoT type solutions, we obviously have the opportunity to work with lots of great companies and organizations that are building and designing digital signage and kiosk type applications. And the reason these companies are doing it are really kind of multifold. Number one, a lot of times they can provide a cost savings. They have the ability to display information, interact with potential clients and customers without having the expense of an employee. It also benefits that interaction because the users of that data, or the folks that will actually be participating or using the digital signage or kiosk, will also get that information typically a lot quicker and cleaner. So it really kind of creates a kind of a benefit from a customer satisfaction standpoint, also helps to eliminate costs. So those are, I think, probably the two main points from a digital signage standpoint: efficiency and then improving customer relationships.
Well, tell me, what are the basics an operation needs to consider concerning network communications connectivity?
So that's another great question. What we have found that most successful applications or implementations of digital signage type technologies is one in which it does have connectivity. And what I mean by that is connectivity to either, a private network connection or a public, type connection through the quote unquote internet. And the benefit for that connectivity is that you have constantly updated information. So once that information is displayed, if you can think about something as simple as an airport, right? Flight information obviously adjusts very quickly, and that information being displayed efficiently and quickly will benefit the customer. So you need to have that connectivity so you can have information that does not become stale, even if it is more of a marketing kind of application where you're updating the content at an infrequent basis. Think of like a digital billboard or something to that effect, where it's just rotating through different advertisements. Being able to push out new ads, efficiently and keeping that content refreshed is also extremely important. So I think connectivity provides the ability to efficiently get information out to the consumers, making that information actually more relevant. That's kind of the the basic need, if you will, behind connectivity. And then some of the things you need to consider, we have found, is that these digital signage type applications don't reside in the data center, right? So if you think about where your normal equipment is and you're running wires back into your data center, these type of applications sometimes are standalone kiosks or little stands in the middle of a high traffic area. And we find that cellular connectivity specifically provides a huge benefit because it's ubiquitous, right? So if you think about the ability for your usage of your mobile phone, you have the ability to use that phone pretty much realistically anywhere you go. So when you're thinking about building out a digital signage type solution, you're typically wanting to get that information or that signage, if you will, out to the consumer or the user of that information. So that cellular provides that benefit. The other negative that customers find trying to use existing infrastructure that might be in a facility. So if you think about maybe, again, we talked about airports. So if you think about an airport, there might be Wi-Fi available in that airport. Sometimes digital signage providers think that, hey, I'm just going to write off of that Wi-Fi. Well, Wi-Fi sometimes has prompts and requirements for you to authenticate. It can change in terms of the Wi-Fi network names and passwords. And then more importantly, though, if you think about a retail environment, because there's been specific examples of this in the past, security exposures can come by allowing other vendors to actually participate on a vendor's or customer's existing network. So a lot of times, these digital signage applications need their own standalone connectivity from an application standpoint, and that's why cellular again becomes a really good option with building out those type of connections.
Okay. Well, going back to the actual implementation process from the client's standpoint, which aspect or element is the most challenging to implement?
Again, from a wireline standpoint, if you were trying to use wireline, is finding connectivity or getting a wire out to that device. That is probably one of the most difficult. That's why, again, cellular is a great opportunity to allow a customer to really roll these things out. You do need power, so they have to have some type of power, but power is typically pretty ubiquitous around most facilities. So getting access to power is one thing, but getting your network connection makes it extremely difficult. So not having that flexibility of moving a device around is the biggest challenge with these type of applications. And that's, again, where the cellular type solution comes in to be a really good play.
Now, in doing some research on this topic, I came across a term I wasn't familiar with, failover. Can you explain exactly what failover means?
So failover is a term used to describe the ability for a device to have multiple options to connect to. So, for example, their primary network connectivity might be a wireline, for example, in the facility. Cellular is a great complement to wireline because cellular bypasses all the infrastructure associated with a wireline service. So a failover type solution could be one where the content is so important or so critical to the customer that it needs to have not only a primary, but typically a backup connection to it. So what the failover term really kind of refers to is that it has the ability to go from the primary network connection to the backup connection by detecting that the primary network link is no longer active. That can be a physical link connection, or it can determine that it has no what's considered IP connectivity, or it could meaning it has connectivity to the wireline, but it can't get out to any sites on the quote unquote internet or the site specifically that's hosting the content or information that it needs. So that failover process is one in which it self-detects there's a problem and then clicks over or switches over to an alternate path. Those paths are typically referred to as WAN or wide area network paths. So it has the ability to switch back and forth between different paths to guaranteed connectivity. So that's what that failover process is. There's a failover and sometimes they fail back to whatever your preferred connectivity option is.
Well, that sounds like a pretty important consideration. How exactly do you implement failover?
So it's typically part of a router type device, and the router it could be built in to the digital signage application. Meaning, if you're using, let's call it a full, PC or something that's driving that, you would need to have typically multiple network interfaces on the device, or again, if you're using a router, what's referred to as a dual WAN router. So you would use that router and you would configure that to say, my primary connection is A and my backup connection is B. And then you define the parameters or the timing in which it fails over. So for example, a parameter can be very aggressive and say, hey, After 10 seconds of inability to connect to my primary link, I immediately switch over to the backup. And then I continue to use that backup until I detect that the primary link comes back online. So even though I'm running on the backup, I'm still testing, through that router or that networking function, the primary link to see if it comes back, and then I can switch back over. So you implement it through basically just providing settings, and you do need a dual WAN or dual network type solution, typically on a router that you can configure to do that failover process and then fail back.
So tell me, how can a company or an organization be certain that their networking connections are secure?
Really, it comes down to trying to follow all the best practices possible. So I gave the example of a retailer that might have or provide the ability for another vendor to come in with a kiosk or digital signage type platform solution housed in that location. Now, there has been specific examples in the recent past where large retailers have been, if you will, had a security exposure because they're letting that vendor or that third-party vendor participate on their network, and that third-party vendor did not keep their, I'll call it their network software up to date. So, having a provider that gives you the ability to have, I'll call it kind of cloud-based or remote connectivity to the router at all times to keep the firmware at the latest version. Best practices of changing whatever your default passwords are to a private custom password that's very secure that only you know. Considering any kind of encryption standards, as well as making sure any kind of firewall type rules that you're set up are such in the way where they're only allowing initiated traffic to go back through or only allowing outbound traffic as an example. So every solution is a little bit different when it comes down to security standpoint, but the keys are physical security because you want to make sure your equipment is physically secure. You also want to make sure if you're the primary real retailer or host location that you're not letting that vendor share your network and put you in a way that you could be exposed, meaning you want to keep their traffic separate from your private traffic. And then other, I'll call them just general best practices when it comes to security, making sure you have a unique password defined, ensuring that your firewall rules are set up correctly, and then keeping that firmware. I can't stress that enough, keeping firmware up to date. And firmware is defined as the software that's driving your routing device. And that you see news all the time where, hey, security exposures found and different operating systems. Well, the point of that firmware update is to keep your OS fresh and eliminate any kind of security holes that might be there.
Now, when working with an outside networking provider, do you as the client maintain ownership of the data that's being transmitted?
That's typically defined on the application. So we as a cloud-based software and hardware provider, we do not own any data. So we're simply a pass-through from our company's perspective. You do need to be careful because some vendors, when you're signing up for, I'll call them kind of cloud-based databases and applications and solutions in the cloud, you can find that sometimes they have like little notes and terms saying that they could potentially own the data. But for the most part, that is not the case. Most vendors would provide equipment, services, and even hosting type platforms where you're not owning customer data and the customer still owns their data. But that is something that each vendor that you're using, you might want to consider.
What are the key skills necessary for a company or organization trying to build out their own IoT network in a retail environment?
So the first and foremost thing I think you need is somebody that does have a basic, understanding of networking. That allows you to do, or set up your devices in such a way that it has the ability to communicate back and forth with whatever content, information or data that is going to be out there, as well as also making sure that data is secure, which we already kind of talked about. So I think the networking side of things and building out that process and application is important. Also, you want somebody that has a basic understanding of, working in kind of a retail environment. Obviously, retailers are very concerned with appearance, aesthetics, and the reason I keep referring to retail is because you get a lot of eyeballs, if you will, or people in those type of environments, and that's where you a lot of times find a lot of these type of applications. So keeping the the setup of that equipment in such a way that it's not an eyesore. If you have equipment that is exposed, you want it to kind of blend in, having a positive aesthetic appearance. But then again, it all goes back to the networking and making sure that network is set up. And then cellular, if you're going to be using cellular, having a good understanding of cellular data. Cellular is one of those things that is relatively new in the history of networking, but it's becoming very quickly. It's becoming one of the preferred methods of doing a lot of your connectivity back into the network. So having a basic understanding of cellular technologies and how to get an optimal signal at each of your locations is important as well.
Now, where can a person find out more information on this whole topic of network connectivity and related issues?
Okay, great question. So the carriers themselves obviously are a rich source of information. So if you're thinking about in the U.S., there are multiple cellular carriers out there. Going directly to a carrier can provide a lot of good and helpful information. That being said, carriers are very large, right? So sometimes you can have a little bit of difficulty, especially if your sales rep that you're purchasing is more, I guess, focused on something like a smartphone or tablet kind of solution, right? And they're not very good with the routers. And that's where we find in our industry that VARs, which is an acronym for VAR, or value added reseller, come into play. So there are specific partners and resellers out there that have not only a good grasp and understanding of the technology, they can also sell it to you, and they can also put together bundles and solutions for you and really help you on your way to building kind of that optimal digital signage kiosk solution, because they've done it before. They've worked with other customers in the past. So I think those kind of integrating partners are very important. Of course, you're going to get a lot of helpful information from vendors such as ourselves, we being the OEM or the equipment manufacturer.
Jason, could you describe a typical digital signage application?
So I look at digital signage typically as more of an informational type of solution. So if you think about kind of the airport example, right? Having information up, just even like the status of your boarding, right, of your plane. Typically the carriers or the airlines will typically put up information. Hey, we're boarding zone X, right? And then that way exactly where they're at in the boarding process. And then if there's flight delays or any kind of changes to the gate assignments, that kind of stuff can be announced. We all typically try to ignore the loud noises at the airport, but having those signs up is a very convenient way of getting information out. So notices, information, even when you're in your doctor's office, right? I mean, typically videos and whatnot can be displayed, just giving just overall health information as you're waiting for your doctor. It's something that can help pass the time. Advertising is another common application that's used in digital signage. And then if you can also think about just you go up to the counter and order food, right? Just having that ability to see pictures and information, pricing on the things that you're ordering. Those are all I guess common digital signage type use cases.
Could you give a description of a typical digital kiosk application?
Great question. And I'm not necessarily the expert on this, but I think that when I think of kiosk, I think of the word, in one word, I think of interactive, right? So it's typically, a digital signage application that's taken to the next level. And this is also why the value proposition comes into play of connectivity, because if you're interacting with something, typically, you might, request something, it goes out, looks for information, comes back. That could be even as simple as, paying for something, right? So if you think about a kiosk that's becoming more commonplace in the food service industry, a lot of times, an end user can go to a little kiosk, see pictures of their food, place orders, choose all the different options, condiments they might want, pop in their credit card, and then they get a number or ticket, or if you will, and then they go up to the counter to actually get their food. So that's an example of a kiosk type solution in kind of a restaurant environment. Think about the kind of I'll call it kind of grab and go kind of things, right? Where you can go get DVD movies out of a kiosk, maybe even get a vacuum cleaning system. Those kind of things where you're kind of interactive are more what I consider kind of the kiosk type applications. And again, They're very important, typically because they need that connectivity. If it's not for credit card processing, it's for processing information. I saw, it was kind of like a photo booth kind of thing recently where you would be able to go into kind of in front of the little booth and pose, and then behind you they would actually put in NFL players, take a picture, so kind of a photo booth kind of thing, and it really looked very lifelike, right? So those kind of things that are fun, right? And those kind of things that are beneficial from the vendor because they don't need to have a staff person to sell you a movie or let you get a movie rental or a vacuum cleaner even these days. So that's I think interaction is kind of the difference between what I would consider more of a kiosk versus digital signage.
Well, now I've also come across a term, bring your own network. What exactly does that mean?
Well, this goes back to the cellular discussion. So this is a really good one, and where a lot of the, if you think about a department store or other kind of retail environment, big box store, they typically have multiple stands, kiosks, whether it's even kind of an ATM machine or one of those rental grab and go kind of things, right? Sprinkled throughout, typically at the front of the stores, right? Those are the guys that typically feel like they can be very exposed if they give anybody just access to their network, and they not only would preach that it's a benefit for you to bring your own cellular, and that's what we're talking about here, typically cellular, or bring your own network, but they might even require it. So when you hear the concept of bring your own network, what that is really referring to is you're bringing your own IP connectivity or your own connectivity back to a network. And again, I would say that the vast majority, if not all, of those type of scenarios are related to cellular data. You hear the term 4G quite often. The vendors, the carriers are very much, pretty much done with their 4G rollouts, and they're all now looking to the future. So you're starting to hear more about 5G type technologies. And as these technologies evolve, the speeds, the reliability, the latency, all are improved. So it's just a really big improvement over years past of what kind of performance you can get out of these type of applications and systems. So your multimedia experience is really driving up a lot of opportunity for new use cases.
Well, tell me, how soon will 5G be here?
Well, I'm depending on the carrier you're talking to, they're going to tell you now, but a lot of times it's marketing. I typically don't like to involve myself too much with the G moniker, right? That's a generation concept. What it really comes down to is what's the underlying technology. So LTE, and not to get on a little tangent here, but LTE stands for long-term evolution. So when LTE was first launched, you basically got your single lane to the tower, the cellular tower, and you're transmitting data. Well, LTE Advanced and LTE Advanced Pro and future versions of LTE that are kind of already being launched, like gigabit LTE, what they're doing is they're giving you more lanes to the tower. Now 5G takes it to another level, right? You're not just talking to a spectrum or talking through a spectrum that a carrier owns. There are now unlicensed spectrums out there that go high frequencies and then low frequencies and then frequencies in between. So a lot of the 5G technologies are still being vetted in the marketplace, and it's really good for you not to get too much wrapped around the axle on what technology is going to work where. But the key is it's going to be different in terms of the underlying technologies at almost each location. So urban areas are going to be able to leverage those higher frequencies and get a lot more data, whereas more rural areas, they're typically not going to benefit from that because it doesn't cost justify to put those high frequencies because you get very short distances. So I guess my answer to your question is 5G is evolving. There are some test markets out there where you have some of this available today. But I would say that cellular data is very much here now and ready to go for most use cases, if not all use cases, even just with the 4G and gigabit LTE speeds that we're seeing today.
All right. Well, as a final question, Jason, what are the pros and cons of using an existing network?
So the using the existing network, that's a great question. The pros and cons are that, and then really most of them are pros, right? That you get to control your own destiny, you get to control your network. You don't have situations where you're relying on somebody else. You're bringing your own network connection in place. There is one negative, right? You have to pay for that airtime, right? So you do have to pay for a connection, just like you pay a carrier for your cell phone. You do have to pay a charge for that connection at that facility. Now, the good thing is, in a cellular data environment, you don't necessarily pay what you would pay on your cellular rates. You can buy just the data you need, and you can build your application so you're only pulling down the data that you need, so that you can kind of do store and forward of data. You're not just transmitting all the time. You're pulling down all your videos. You're letting them sit locally, and then they're being displayed, and they're just being updated through the cellular connection. So those are the pros are many. The one negative is you do have to pay a little bit more from a monthly standpoint to keep it operational.
All right. Well, this has all been great information on a topic that's very important to kiosk marketplace readers. So, Jason, I want to thank you for your time today. This has been Achieving Connectivity Integrity with Kiosk Marketplace. And at this point, I think we'll sign off. Jason, thank you for your time.